second episode, and we'll reveal the movie shortly. But
what is this podcast, I ask?
Yeah.
It is a podcast called Estranged that we have recently started, Adrian and I.
Mm-hmm.
We are looking at film through an ideological lens. We are taking a film each episode and discussing some of the themes emerge and how we respond to it given a current cultural situation, societal system.
That sounds pretty good.
Okay.
I'd listen to it if
Would
I wasn't
you?
in it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm guessing we're going to have to listen to them back and edit out any extremely rude things that we say or controversial things that might get us into trouble in this very puritanical age.
Well, like we should, we'll be clever about it. Maybe do a Patreon and release like the unedited version. Or...
the bit that we bitch about everybody.
Yeah. Only the people that are like loyal, can listen to the unedited.
Our one follower.
Yeah.
No, I think we are trying to be at least politically nice, as in it's a political decision to be nice. And I kind of think it is important not to just resort to kind of rampant criticisms, easy digs at things that are happening in our world, and really kind of thinking about why things are the way they are and how things are emergent of a wider problem.
Yeah.
Perhaps. And that sometimes easy digs are kind of are maybe representative of not having enough knowledge or not having a good enough understanding as to why things are the way they are. So we're trying to be as reasonable as we can be.
And dysfunctional political projects eventually shoot themselves in the foot anyway. So.
Oh, you were referring to something very particular, are you? Would you like to share what it is? No, just joking.
Oh, no, I wasn't.
We don't want to get too deep in a certain hole.
Sure, yeah.
But yes, it's a hole that maybe at some stage we would distance ourselves from. We're both fans of Zero Books and the content they put out. And I know Doug made a video recently about a certain kind of leftist project that is not associated with a certain kind of political movement, which I think we would align ourselves with. And maybe I'm being very elusive as to what we're talking about, but maybe over the course of our podcasts you will come to see what we mean. But we are cowardly people, perhaps.
Yeah, we're under the rocks. We're having our conversations under the rock, and like it's what the fuck am I saying?
Under the rocks.
No.
Is that a Spanish idiom that isn't?
No. Isn't it this thing like come under your rock? Aren't like iguanas like under the rocks and they just don't like they just come out for?
I think it's definitely a Mexican phrase if it's talking about iguanas. No.
Yeah.
No, it's funny when
iguana, tequilas, rocks, the desert,
desert, all that stuff. No, when one speaks different language and then one uses an idiom with the direct word replacement in another language.
Oh yeah.
It's quite funny because you realize how weird language is, and certain idiomatic phrases that can't be translated language to language, and you just say something in a different language and it's like, what?
Yeah, we were talking about this before because there's a few authors that write in French, and then the translation is into English, but it helps to know a Latin language.
I think, you're right.
You speak Spanish pretty well.
Well, thanks. I mean, I used to speak it better, but I let it slide. Yeah. And I'm trying to get back into it. Maybe we should record an episode in Spanish, and I will be terrible.
Yeah, that would be cool.
But we'll be talking a lot about Spanish film, Mexican film potentially at some stage, because there are lots of directors we admire. But talking about language, actually, this film that we are going to talk about today is a lot to do with language. I mean, the principal theme is language.
The previous episode, we talked about that there's two types of films, ones that represent ideology and ones that are within ideology. Mm-hmm. To me, it seems like this is the type of film that represents ideology.
I mean, we were saying that we were going to look at both films that we like and dislike because, a value judgment is nothing to do with the project of this podcast.
Yeah.
And
in a very millennial fashion, we started masochistically with a film that we don't like.
Yes. There's something about millennials. I mean, we'll also, this is something that we'll get very deep into throughout this podcast. But yeah, we're a very negative generation, and perhaps not surprising.
And we enjoy it.
We enjoy it. We enjoy our enjoyment,
Yeah.
which is perhaps a good thing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being negative necessarily. But it's funny because we were talking about various podcasts that we enjoy listening to, and there's a certain very negative tinge to a lot of them. And I think often when one is critiquing a system, and as I was saying earlier, it's very easy to just get into blind, angry, well, not necessarily angry, but, criticisms and negativity. And I don't know if that's the best way to go.
But we couldn't help it. We did it like in a kind of a metaphysical way. Like, we tried to be nice about it, but we were talking about a film that we hate.
Yeah, we both didn't like that film.
Yeah.
But we can appreciate the triumph in certain dimensions that it was.
Well, we don't have to. It's
yeah.
still super successful.
So yeah, exactly. They did it very, very well. But we finished watching it last night, and we were both. I was almost. I'm a very verbose person, and I was speechless in my kind of.
It's very mesmerizing.
Disgust.
We were gonna watch 20 minutes, and we watched the whole thing.
Yeah. We were the capitalist incantation took us over.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, but this film, we both love.
We do like this film.
And it is made by a director whom I admire immensely, who is, I think, my personal favorite of contemporary directors. And he does the very admirable thing of making, very artistically impressive films, of kind of walking the line between art house and mainstream.
Yeah.
And some of his early films are incredible.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Polytechnique.
Yes. I kind of am at a loss expressing how much I love this director.
Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah. Yes. And I was very lucky to work with an actor recently who has been in some of this director's films.
2 or 3, right?
Yeah, and I kind of feel it's kind of straight. I feel like the degrees of separation are not very big, but enormous in reality. It's kind of like accidentally, that we were really lucky to work with this actor. But I just can't believe that David has worked with Denis Villeneuve.
Yeah. Have you asked him about it?
I haven't. I've asked him about certain directors, but I haven't asked him about working with Denis Villeneuve. But yeah, my admiration is too strong. Yeah,
you gotta keep it unknown, not know much about it, so you can keep on fetishizing it.
I know exactly. I will one day, perhaps, will be revealed that, I don't know, there's some aspect about him, like he does something strange, like.
You can idealize it right now. Just enjoy filling in the gaps.
But this film, Arrival, and to be honest, he didn't write it, and it is really the feat of the script that I was most taken by.
Yeah.
The real technique of structurally incorporating the main theme of the film within the structure itself.
Ted Chiang is
the short story writer. Did he write the script, or was that them?
No, he didn't. I don't think he wrote the script, but the short story came out in '98. It's called Story of Your Life.
Yeah.
Did you read it?
I have not read the story. I have just been a Philistine and watched the film. But
it was written by Eric Heiser.
Okay, yes. But yeah, this film is just a really wonderful film, and it expresses a lot of things, a lot of phenomena that we're quite interested in. Do you want to tackle one of those things?
Sure. So I think one of the things that, by the way, if you haven't seen the movie, maybe go watch it. And if you're still interested, you can listen to the episode, but there's definitely going to be some spoilers, right? Mm-hmm. So I think one of the things that really interested me about it is the ending, where you get this reveal that Amy Adams, the character that Amy Adams plays, knows that her daughter is going to get sick and pass away, and also knows that her husband is going to leave her because she knows, and she still has the kid. Mm-hmm. And this comes from a very complex story, but basically there's a few alien ships that come down to Earth, 12, and she starts to have like these sort of side effects of visions in cause of these ships, and she knows that she has these visions of the future, and it's kind of complicated because you think that this is like she's having flashbacks. At least the first time that I saw the movie, I thought she was having flashbacks, but they're flash forwards, and she decides to still have the daughter, and eventually the husband finds out about that she knew and leaves her. And I think Zizek made this critique of the movie, saying that, you know, she shouldn't have done that, that it was like very selfish of her to have the kid. But part of me wonders if we all don't do that. Eventually, every time that we bring somebody into the world, we know that they're eventually going to die. And particularly now, I've actually had this conversation with my parents. It's like, how can I have a kid knowing that like global warming is a thing, knowing that we're in an environmental crisis, financial crisis? It's just not a good place to bring people into. And you know, they kind of gave me this shrug, like, well, that's just the way it is. And and we all do it. Like we all are aware of the dangers of life. We're all aware of death, and we're all aware of financial difficulty and environmental difficulty, and yet we still choose to bring life into the world. I don't think it made a difference to her that she had the vision.
Value judgment is necessary in terms of, you know, if it's a selfish thing to do or not. But it's interesting because the two phenomena that I feel like this film is such a human film, and the two aspects that I think are really interesting are the idea of language and how language makes us human, and language related to thought and consciousness, and then also death, and how death is part of the human experience.
And the repression of death.
The repression of death. Yeah, that was exactly something I was just going to ask you now. So I think the words you used were, you know, so she knows about, or even given this death, she's going to do it. But we were talking earlier about repression and how we repress as humans the inevitability of death.
Yeah.
What have you to say about this?
Well, I just think that she has a very clear and vivid vision of the struggles that her daughter is going to go through. But I think she represses it.
Yeah.
I don't know if it's selfishness. It might be. But then we all are.
Yeah.
I think we all are. Like, and the interesting thing is that she's the one that had the vision, and she decided to have the kid anyway. Jeremy Renner finds out that she had the vision, and then he gets upset and he leaves her. I don't think that he would have made a decision that was different than hers. If he had the vision, I think he would have still had the kid anyway, because you need that repression of death.
It is interesting. So the idea of repression of death, I mean, we tend to, I think, especially in this modern world where things are much more clinical and we live longer and we're less surrounded by the dangers of life. You know, 200 years ago, you might lose any number of children and death was much more prominent. We repress death and we see life in terms of life. But I think, was it Freud who talked about how life was actually just a diversion between two deaths, and that, you know, originally the first living cell was just a flash of life, and gradually we've extended this diversion between two deaths to something, you know, around 80 years, and that really we are framed by life.
Yeah.
Sorry, that was a Freudian slip. Lol. We are framed by death.
Yeah.
We are actually, both of us, making a film this year, which is inspired by a Buddhist parable about death, about a woman losing her child and coming to terms with it. And the idea, you know, the film ends with the line that only death can bring life to life. And it is death it is the finitude of everything that brings life to life.
Yeah.
But we really repress this idea of death, that we're going to die. It's almost impossible for us to conceive of it.
I think that her decision to not have the child would have destroyed her in some way, because that would have been bringing death to the fore. I think that she had to make that decision empirically to repress death in her own life.
And repression isn't necessarily a bad thing. You know, we talk about culturally, we are very influenced by a lot of the ideology that surrounded the '68 revolution. And, you know, it was kind of like an early Freud, which is repression is bad, allow yourself to be who you're meant to be, sex good, you know. And we have this kind of very public, we have this entering into the public realm of things like sex. But late Freud, you know, was quite conservative and is not against repression. And we have primary repressions give us language. Primary repressions give us ego. Yeah. So, you know, we're kind of on the side of repression to a certain extent. And yeah, repression's not really that much of a bad thing necessarily. But talking about, you know, choice and her choice, do you not think that, I mean, does she have a choice in that the visions tell her that it's going to happen anyway? You know, the kind of the structure of the film is like has the decision already been made in a future before the film has taken place?
Yeah. I mean, it's like, I forgot what that loop theory is, but it's just like there's no way to change it because it's already accounted for in the vision.
Yeah.
But if it was possible, I think the most that she would have existentially been possible, would have had the possibility of doing it, is to just be honest about it from the beginning.
With her
husband or partner.
Yeah, and it's interesting because the idea of repression, you know, we have in film quite a lot the idea of flashbacks, and there's the idea a lot in storytelling of how a character has some trauma or ghost from the past that affects them in the present. And it's almost kind of like I've heard people call contemporary storytelling Freudian, but I would say it's profoundly not Freudian and actually quite Jungian, that a lot of films, certainly Disney films, are to do with coming to terms with this trauma in the past and accepting them and kind of bringing them into oneself to be a better participant in society. Yeah. It's kind of like a lesson to be learned in one's trauma. And now I've lost the tangent of my thought. But the idea of trauma, ghost, something in the past. Deary me, I think
that's a very good point that you brought up, because language comes from an inability to be at one with others.
It's a primary frustration that causes language.
Language is sort of like constituted in an inability to articulate real communication with others. And I think that the same way, like family culture is sort of like constituted in our repression of that it's all going to go away at some point. And it's not something transcendent. And I just think that's a great point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I guess that, you know, this is something in terms of our position that we should probably clarify, that we probably see the unconscious as a rupture rather than a compensatory mechanism. So I actually must confess I used to be a Jungian, and I am not anymore.
Oh no!
It's a long story, but we've said in our previous podcast that we're not experts, but this is just from kind of lived experience. And I would say the difference between Jung and Freud is that Freud and later Lacan and others see the unconscious as a rupture, as something that can't be fixed. There's no lesson there. It's a nothing. It's a void. It's a rupture, a break, from which eventually language comes. And so Jung is more the unconscious is a compensatory mechanism, and the way I see films being kind of more Jungian than Freudian is that there's a lesson that the character has to learn, that a past trauma that they carry with them, that eventually they come to terms with, they incorporate it within them. There's a lesson, and they become better, quote unquote. But we don't think there's an ultimate lesson. There's no message, and there's no becoming.
And this is why, and I think this is why this film is very realistic, even though it's a sci-fi movie, and it's that, you know, she doesn't adapt to some kind of archetype of being a hero. She doesn't do that. Like she's completely aware that, you know, regardless of the vision, it would have happened anyway. So, I think there's something in the surrender to death, while simultaneously also kind of repressing it, so that you can live your life. That is beautifully captured in the film.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a I feel there's certain like two categories of films. There's films of escape, and then there's films of like consolation. And this is maybe a film of consolation. And I feel like, you know, all there is really consolation, because we can't escape the reality of being a human, which is profoundly traumatic. And yeah, you either have a kind of a, and there's some, the Freud talked about infantilization, for instance, in terms of religion, that there's nothing necessarily wrong with having a crutch sometimes and escaping, but does the escape allow you to re-enter into life in a damaging way, and you continue to damage yourself until you have this other opportunity of escape? And it's interesting, there's films at cinemas in Ireland, there's a this chain of cinemas called the Omniplex, and they have this, now they have in cinema chains these like elaborate animations or little videos about turn off your phone and these very high production values, but it basically expresses how you're here at the cinema to escape your shitty life, and this amazing thing, you're going to see this spectacle and escape into this magical realm. And there's nothing wrong with that necessarily, and we do need crutches sometimes, we need to be infantilized sometimes, but yes, sometimes films provide that, and sometimes films allow for a consolation of a shared human experience that is profoundly difficult and traumatic, and there isn't an answer. Yeah
Go ahead.
I was going to say, so should we talk about language a bit more?
Let's do
and
it.
How the film's shape is shaped by language. And I guess the insight of, one of the linguistic insights of this film is that language is thought. So as soon as she comes to learn this circular language that the aliens kind of are communicating with her in, kind of teaching her, she becomes able to think in a circular way. So yes, and language is thought. And I mean, I don't know, how deep dive do we go? How we could express what kind of a psychoanalytic structure of self, how self comes out of language, how language creates ego, or ego creates language, So do you want to talk about that a bit?
Well, it seems to me like there's this is the thing that's confusing to me. And I'm wondering if it's okay, so there's an interruption into human life by the alien
in the film. Yes.
In the film, and I don't know if it makes a difference for the world, that world in the movie. They're there, but I think that the language that the aliens bring, and it does start to change things, but I don't know if really the humans that come out in the movie like can really incorporate into their lifestyles like the changes that this language brings.
Because I guess the motivation of the aliens is they need the help of they're going to need the help of the humans in 3,000 years time, so they need to be able to communicate with humans in order for that to happen. Is that right? But the tool or weapon, as they say, the gift is this language, this tool. But whether that actually helps us to be better humans. And I guess it's funny because I remember watching the trailer back in 2016 of this film and thinking, oh my gosh, this looks terrible. It's about cooperation, some like really simplistic message. And actually, obviously they didn't reveal the big reveal in the trailer, and which kind of profoundly changes the reality of the structure of the story and takes it from kind of a very kind of single level conflict to cooperation kind of film. But I think you're right. I can't really remember if it's brought to light whether we have to learn to cooperate with each other. Is that that?
Well,
it's a language of unity.
That's why I'm saying that I'm not sure that it made a difference, because it's reduced to this sort of like cooperative thing. But I think that the difference is that our language is temporal and theirs is not. And I'm not sure that like they could even communicate with each other in any meaningful way. I think that Amy Adams or any of the other guys that were like studying the language, they do have like visions, but it's in a very human way. I don't think that they experience it as something alien. I think the only alien thing is what they're seeing visually. But I don't know. I'm just not sure that there's like a compatibility between the two languages, like the temporal or the atemporal, which makes me wonder if we're even able to think atemporally. I mean, what's that thing of like, if you want to see if what somebody really believes, is just like, don't listen to what they say, listen, see what they do. And what happens at the end of the film is just that life continues on as if nothing. She's aware of the whole death thing, but she doesn't do anything about it.
Yeah, no, I think that's actually quite interesting. You know, this is potentially a difference between this film and Hollywood movies. Well, it is a Hollywood movie, but traditional kind of cliche Hollywood movies, that there's some change, that change happens.
Yeah.
Whereas, you know, it's information, but nothing changes. And it's almost because... Yeah, the difference often between is this misunderstood of a continental perspective and perhaps, you know, a liberal perspective. There's a lot of similarities, but they're profoundly different within themselves. It's very hard to explain. That everything's different, but nothing's different. And it's the same with, you know, that the psychoanalytic cure. I mean, there's no real cure.
Sure.
But there is.
Yeah.
You know, it's I think I mentioned it in the last...
It's sort of
podcast.
an anti-cure.
It's an anti-cure. Yeah. Do not give way in terms of your desire. Both don't go after this hideous pursuit of your desire and kill yourself in this kind of driven zombie way. And also, don't let it pass. Keep doing it.
Yeah.
It's a textural difference.
Yeah.
That anything can be healthy or unhealthy. But it's kind of a drive and desire difference.
So what you're saying is that she knows, but at the same time,
yeah, what does that knowledge...
the only thing that she can do is just continue on with her life. And there's an eruption in her language by the introduction of a different language, but at the end of the day, I'm not sure that she incorporates it in any meaningful way.
And that, I mean, that's a message in and of itself. You know, as in Zizek's point, you know, don't act, just think. As in any act, any action, any form of action can be damaging and negative, or it can be good. And so almost, what is there to do other than be aware? Yeah. Yeah, I don't...
Yeah, but I like this thing that you're talking about, like the solution of psychoanalysis being sort of a non-solution. And I think the solution comes from a surrender of the possibility of a cure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like once you start letting go of that, once you start letting go of that hope, then the real possibility of some kind of something that comes in and really can change your perspective in the world starts to manifest itself.
It's the first step of the 12 steps is to accept that you're accepted, and no change can come without acceptance of no change. You know, you might be at step 0 forever, and that's fine.
Yeah,
you're an alcoholic, and it's fine. And I think, you know, that's really the difference between capitalism ideologically and what a kind of potentially a world that we're talking about. There's nothing necessarily wrong with capitalism in and of itself. And is capitalism even a thing? It is just the toxic pursuit of its drive.
Yeah.
Rather than, and you know, there's nothing, we were talking about La La Land last week, there's nothing wrong with wanting to be famous or be an actress. But it's coming to the realization that is not going to change your life, and it's not going to make you happy, and there's no solution. Yeah,
capitalism, together with a bunch of other types of ideologies, is just, and this is something that I've heard Todd McGowan say, and it's like ideology is sort of like a way to experience the world without a contradiction, or at least repressing contradiction.
Yeah, it's a papering over of the real.
Yeah. So I think that the inability to communicate through language is precisely what constitutes communication as we know it. And all of these like non-capacities that we have, or we can't really articulate certain things, that becomes a reality. When we can't articulate something, we cover over it with something substantial.
Yeah.
And it becomes sort of, I don't know if that's like really the point of the film, but it seems to me like that's the way that society works.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we don't want to experience conflict. We don't want to experience the void that reminds us of the nothingness of our existence, of death.
Right, and I'm not even sure that we're able to do that, which is why I think that maybe the whole heptapod thing and the language thing is like, does it make a difference, or are we completely even unable to see?
It's interesting because there's something very Rothko about the interaction between the two scientists and the heptapods. You know, it's like it's a painting. You know, they have this screen.
Yeah.
This like pantalla. I don't know what's the word. Like a big window where they're. And recently, I went to the Tate Modern with a friend and went to the Four Seasons work with Rothko, and you know, it is. I've heard lots of people. I cried when I witnessed it, and to me, you know, it really, it's the void, it's the rupture.
Yeah.
And you know, I guess the crying is a representation of papering over ideologically in my own life.
Sure.
That imminence of death.
Yeah.
It's profoundly frightening and visceral, and
it's very elemental, right? Like I mean, Rothko stuff is just there's something about it that is very unsettling because of how simple it is, and
and it's very simple. You know, the production design and everything of the intro. You know, they're there in these orange suits and these heptapods, this very kind of sleek minimalist spaceship, and a kind of
bare bones thing.
Yeah, but talking about you know, this film kind of having a very kind of acceptance driven ending, you know, that nothing changes, there's no escape, and really all there is living in this kind of difficulty that we're in. Perhaps we should talk about the difference between drive and desire, and what the difference between drive and desire is, and how drive relates to capitalism. Because it's funny, I was talking recently with my parents, and actually my mum comes from a very communist family, and so she doesn't really like it. Like, her dad was an armchair communist, and she was calling me an armchair communist. I have a descendant who is quite a prominent communist in London and was exiled to Paris for a long time, so this printing press and all this kind of stuff. But you know, I don't have anything. I have no qualms with making money, people working hard, going after goals with the world that we're in. I don't think there's some magical solution that, say, a communist system would necessarily replace and improve.
Yeah.
But to me, it's kind of like a textural difference. You know, kind of a libidinal investment in drive.
Yeah.
Is what characterizes our capitalist system, and it's why it's so difficult to identify, and why potentially we need films to have it reflected back to us. Yeah. Because we can't see it.
Sure.
And it's not really a thing.
Yeah.
It's a balloon of everybody's libidinal desire into this belief that there's something out there, some lost object that will return us to the kind of oneness of the womb as long as we get it.
Yeah.
And it's only in realizing that doesn't exist, but that we can still go on enjoying our lives and pursuing what we want to do and making money and working hard and whatever we want to do, but it's a kind of a textural difference. So everything is different, but nothing is different.
Yeah, and I think the difference is that it's been really difficult for me to find those things in my own life. The things that, how is it that I am repeating loss in my own life? Like, what are the things that I know are going to fail, but that I'm doing them anyway? And the interesting thing is that they don't present themselves to us as loss or as a lack in our lives, but as the meaning of our lives. This is why I'm a meaningful individual, because I'm pursuing. You
overvalue something, you know.
Exactly.
You arbitrarily, meaning absolutely. It's like love. Love, we were talking about last episode, but love is kind of an arbitrary, ridiculous overvaluing of something, and as humans we overvalue. Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with overvaluing.
Sure.
To a certain extent, but yeah, you're right. It's like the Beckett line: "Fail again, fail better." Camus, that all there is pushing the rock up the mountain like Sisyphus, and we have to imagine Sisyphus happy. Yeah. And the happiness is here and now in the grit and grime of our lives, just trying to do what we want to do.
Yeah, and I think it comes to a certain point. I hope that people really come to a certain point in their lives where they just have to take apart the things that seem the most obvious in their lives, because that's probably where drive is operating. You can't stop drive, but at the same time, not knowing sort of the lack that is being covered over by these pursuits that we have, can really lead to some, maybe a psychotic break or some kind of other form of psychic destruction. I think that people need to be aware that that as people, we're always pursuing something that is fundamentally impossible to achieve.
Yeah. It's interesting to use the word knowing, because again, you know, psychoanalysis, I mean, all there is really is coming to awareness of things, and whether that awareness actually changes anything, really. But again, you know, to repeat Zizek's phrase, don't act, just think. I mean, all there is really coming to awareness and bringing to awareness certain destructive behaviors. I was going to say something in relation to this. I feel like I always like suddenly have an idea and then continue talking and think like, hang on, what was I going to say? But about so I would call myself Lacanian. Like I do love a bit of Lacan. Yeah. And I have a lot of friends who don't like him, who think he was a charlatan, or really there's a visceral kind of dislike. And one of the main dislikes, I mean, I personally think that, you know, a visceral dislike is a lack of understanding. And I don't think really Lacan, I mean, he has a lot of complicated seminars that are quite difficult to follow, but, you know, there are basic ideas that once those basic ideas are understood, it's quite clear. Yeah. But there's a kind of anger at this idea that there's nothing that can, quote unquote, make you happy. So this idea of the lost object. But there are things that can make you happy. Sure. And the difference perhaps is desire and drive. You know, if you're thirsty, a glass of water is going to satisfy you. If you miss your parents, seeing them and giving them a hug is going to make you happier. But it's kind of almost, I don't want to use the word spiritual, but like a metaphysical happiness isn't going to happen. Sure. You know, there's no transcendent object that's going to make you transcendently happy, that's going to allow you to escape a death-imbued life. Yeah. But yeah, there are things, and you know, it's funny because sometimes I've had some friends, you know, talk, for instance, with a film we made, Adrian and I both worked on a film. It's kind of based on a Lacanian insight from Seminar 7. And I somebody I know who's a Jungian had a real angry reaction to it. And he's like, Lacanian newsflash, there are things that can make you happy. And it's, you know, it's kind of like a linguistic thing again. It's like, well, what is happy? I mean, I think happiness is, what is happiness? As Don Draper would say, it's a moment before you need more happiness. But yeah, happiness, I guess, it's satisfaction versus, I mean, it's funny because lots of Lacanians have different words for different things, like, you know, enjoyment versus pleasure. But yeah, I think transcendental happiness for me is not something that really we can find for a very long time as human beings.
I wonder if that's exactly what the heptapods or the aliens were like trying to aim for. Okay. And yeah, some like world peace kind of thing, because you know, they go to 12 different nations that are kind of at odds with each other, but the constitutive antagonism of humanity, I think, would have made that even impossible to read. And it's interesting that when they read the language, there's a sort of double back defense mechanism into reality, which is just go on, have your family, have your maybe have your selfishness and all that, and just enjoy it. But I don't know, I guess there's a few different ways to read it, because it can be a very nihilistic look.
Well, yeah. So I totally interrupted you there. Were you going to talk about nihilism?
No. I was just gonna say that. There's a visitation but I'm not sure that there's an awareness of that visitation that
Mm-hmm.
really is meaningful.
Yeah, it's interesting because nihilism is an interesting topic, and it's funny. There's something very like people get very angry about it, and it's like a lot of Nietzsche, misunderstood, profoundly misunderstood. But it's almost like there's no, nihilism is everything, that one can't live one's life unless one has accepted the nothingness, the void, the rupture
Yeah.
that exists. And then from that point, one can build a life.
Which is interesting because don't they say that they want to come back after, like they're gonna need
To come back after like 3,000
humanity's
years,
help or something after a few years. Maybe that's what needs to happen. Like that, like a complete sort of welcoming of life in all its incompleteness. And once that happens, because I think that that's the difference. So people repressing death and going on with their lives, and people, or Amy Adams, becoming fully aware of death and all that, but continuing to go on with her life. It's just there's a more direct acceptance, and I think that's what maybe changes consciousness, or the aliens are hoping that changes human consciousness into a more direct acceptance of the incompleteness of life, and that might lead to some kind of substantial change.
It's interesting. Yeah, I really, really like the point that you make about, the knowledge and yet going on, the brokenness and yet going on. Nevertheless, she persisted. Lol. No, I'm just joking. That's, no, not my driving mantra. I said mansion. What kind of Freudian slip is that?
Yeah, and the other thing that I mentioned briefly before that I thought was very interesting is that maybe it's sort of the collective acceptance of the incompleteness of life that can really make a difference.
Yeah, no, that is something that really I think is interesting, because someone like Tom McGowan is using psychoanalysis to look at wider societal political issues. And there's often been a kind of critique of psychoanalysis that it's very individualistic and it's very representative of mid-20th century, that it's an emergent of capitalism, it's very individualistic, and you can't apply psychoanalytic ideas to wider society. But maybe you can, and that maybe it is what's necessary, and that maybe we need to communally join together around a kind of lack. Yeah,
no, that's I think that's extremely important. I think that one of the saddest parts of the film is the fact that Jeremy Renner leaves Amy Adams after he knows. But I think there's something there that's like not to be ashamed of, and I think that Jeremy Renner sort of idealizes that knowledge of death, or that knowledge of death in advance. Through visions, he idealizes that as something that would eventually, like if it's something meaningful, or like if he would have made a different choice. I don't think that he would have. He sees Amy Adams as a subject supposed to know that Amy Adams was supposed to make the decision to not have the child and to be a bigger person, or whatever. And I think that really the key for progress in some ways is to understand collectively that we need to go on with life regardless of this incompleteness that is embedded into our existence.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, as you say, we were talking about trends within the potential trends within kind of like millennial culture, kind of like resignation. You see it a lot I've noticed it in pop music a lot. I was just playing to you yesterday a track by Ariana Grande.
Oh yeah.
Which I feel like within its structure itself is this Thank You Next song. It's this very zoned out song. There's no real well, we have huge numbers of hot takes about this topic in terms of millennials. There's no like real rebellion or like energy or passion. Yeah. Pop music is very zoned out. There's a music called trap music. I mean, it's something that I don't personally get, and I'm probably not the demographic that's supposed to get, but it's very zoned out, this kind of Xanax.
Yeah.
And people, there's a real resignation. And the thing is, it's like, just because things are bad, we shouldn't resign ourselves to it.
Yeah.
And as you say, we need to find a way to go on. Our friend Peter had a conference in October last year about creativity. It's a kind of a festival, a camp, as it were, about creativity. And the first talk that he gave, and he decided to organize the festival this way, was about the nothingness as the first step. Step 0 of the 12 steps is, in any advice that you get for anything can be negative as long as you haven't accepted that this thing that you're pursuing is not going to be the solution. Alcoholism isn't a problem, it's a solution to a problem. You know, and anything that we do is often a solution to the lack in our lives. And I don't know whether you experience this, but as somebody who kind of creates for a living, this is something we saw in La La Land. There's often this kind of like fantasy that art is some thing that's going to change us, that poetry has greater meaning to it, that these films can teach us a lesson. And I'm somebody who just thinks no, or that, becoming a great artist is going to make us happy, or getting recognition for our work, or creating some transcendent piece of artwork is going to change the world.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I'm very much like, the work that I do is, or, I'm not saying my work, but as in the field is a field like any other. You could be a plumber, or you could be a musician.
Yeah, and the takeaway from me for Arrival is, do not antagonize other people because they're covering over, or like, don't fetishize others as subjects supposed to know.
Absolutely right.
Like, you can't do that, because eventually, like, when you idealize another person as knowing, you are bringing into existence something that doesn't exist, which is an ultimate sort of position, that like a bird's eye view, that you understand life, and that you can make a higher form of decision. I don't think that that's supposed to happen.
Yeah, definitely. It's subject supposed to know is a big problem in contemporary society, that there's a lot of transference with certain figures and a projection.
A happy ending. I think a happy ending would have been that Jeremy Renner understands Amy Adams' decision to have the kid, because she doesn't have the bird's eye view. She might have these visions of the future or whatever, but ultimately connecting to her humanity, it's just like she didn't have a choice. She had to repress death just as much as he did, as he would have. So
that's interesting. There was one other topic that I wanted to address just before we finished this podcast, and it relates to the idea of language, and how a kind of more Freudian approach to language versus something, I don't want to say Jungian, but a kind of a sort of depth psychology, or a kind of belief that the unconscious has some like message to it. And it's interesting that a child is a big part of this film, and there's, in contemporary society, kind of a fetishization of children, and that the children are closer to kind of this unconscious realm of kind of truth.
Oh God, yeah, I hate that.
And this is something in terms of language that, from a Freudian perspective, language is a result of a nothing. The no of the father, frustration. It emerges, and it is necessary that language exists in order to become a self. Whereas you see it a lot in kind of New Age type religions, or just in society in general, that children know, we must listen to the children. Children are, that as if they are closest to an interpretation of the real, and the real is a bringer of knowledge. It's funny because, I mean, to a certain extent, the rupture is the arrival of these heptapods, and they do have a knowledge, but almost, as you said, it's a knowledge that doesn't really change much.
It can't be articulated, or it can't be transferred substantially into our own language.
But we do have you were talking about bringing children into the world. We do have a tendency to kind of fetishize children, or it's almost kind of, there's a lot of New Age religions that fetishize Eastern perspectives, as if certain people from different cultures are closer to a truth, a kind of an unconscious, like a real, which I don't know why I'm using the word real, because real has nothing to do with any of that. But it is a problem in society that we and potentially there's a lot of people who think, oh, in Eastern religions and whatever Buddhism, there's a subject supposed to know, that they know something that we Westerners don't know, and that there's some great unity in doing yoga. Or
maybe this is why a lot of relationships, well, all relationships, absolutely all relationships between parents and children are completely, they're messed up. And it's because children are seen as the ultimate subject supposed to know.
Well,
they're like fresh out of the womb.
Yeah.
They don't I don't know. It's just, and they become like sort of blank slates at the same time. That I think that it's very easy to project onto them.
Yeah, and you see a lot of. I mean, I just had a nephew that I'm obviously obsessed with because he's very cute from my perspective, and it's very easy to see how the child can complete the mother, or the child knows when it wants to eat. Us humans, we have a problem. Well, as Freud said, like humans can't have sex, humans can't eat, humans can't work. We have to have something in the way. I mean, this is the funny thing about Freud, that a lot of people think that Freud thinks that humans are obsessed with sex. It's like almost the opposite. Humans can't have sex without some kind of additional fantasy getting in the way. You can't just have pure sex like animals. And my mum, it was funny. She was talking about my rabbit. I have a rabbit at home, and it is so wise. It never overeats. We give it a plate of food and it's so disciplined. It only eats what it needs and then it leaves it. And we could all learn a good lesson from that, because we just, but it's, the difference is language. The difference is consciousness. The difference is drive.
Yeah.
And that children are, they are closer to the real, because potentially, egos haven't formed yet, but there is no knowledge there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the ultimate lesson is here that God himself could come down and impart his knowledge, and we should still sort of assume that the other doesn't know anything at all, even if they have some kind of revelation into the future or whatever. I think that there's an inconsistency in humanity that doesn't allow us to see the big picture. I think that we are constituted in repression, and I think that being aware, like the first step maybe is to admit that to ourselves, but then the second step is to admit that others are just like us.
Yeah, absolutely. I know it's funny because, there's almost certainly kind of like a Calvinistic thing is to be modest and to think that we don't know and others know. But I mean, part of the psychoanalytic cure is realizing that
the absolute is fragmented.
Yeah, and that there's no subject supposed to know. And I've had friends who critique Freud as being some big father figure, patriarchal guy who knows everything and is a big boss and he's too big an ego and no. But the whole point of psychoanalysis is to realize that there is no big other.
Yeah, and isn't another point of arrival that maybe the expectations that everybody had of the information that the aliens could impart to them is that they were expecting some kind of huge alien knowledge that was like transcendent or just like, I don't know, something unimaginable that we would be able to somehow incorporate into our way of life. But it's not that at all.
Yeah.
It's an acceptance. It's a doubling back into accepting life as it is.
Yeah, exactly. She has no magical power to change the fact that her child is going to die.
Yeah.
There's another thing that's interesting, that's different perhaps, or unique about this sci-fi film, this alien invasion film versus other films. The kind of the beat that they flip is that this isn't some enemy, that, we assume that they're going to be an enemy, and the characters in the film, the military characters, think that, we have to kill this because they're going to destroy us. And the beat that's flipped is, the stranger is not an enemy. The stranger is somebody we just haven't met yet. And this is something also that potentially, it's a very facile reading that I don't know if you share my opinion, it's not some lesson that we have to learn that the other is just some stranger we haven't met yet, or a friend is a stranger we haven't met yet, that we're all strangers to ourselves.
Exactly.
And strangers are strangers to themselves. And by accessing some other knowledge, we're not going to transform ourselves. The other doesn't have some message for us.
Yeah.
Yeah, we are.
Sorry.
No, go for it.
Oh no, I could see some similarity between this story, the arrival story, and also the the story of Christianity,
Mm-hmm.
and it's that something alien comes to the world
Mm-hmm.
or becomes human,
Mm-hmm.
and everybody expects it to be kingly, everybody expects it to
Mm-hmm.
be absolute,
Mhm.
everybody expects it to be transcendent,
Mm-hmm.
but it's sort of, you know, it's pathetic through familiarity.
Yeah.
And it depicts the alien as fragmented as well,
Mhm.
and having lack.
Yeah, and it needs our help as well. You know, it's not
Yeah, absolutely. That's a
all-powerful.
really, really good point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that needs our help as well. Like it's tied into our very lack,
Mhm,
and I
mhm.
think that that's, I don't know. To me, that's what the movie
Yeah.
means. It's
Yeah,
just like
absolutely
you have
right.
this majestic gesture with the pods and everything, and they come, and you know, there's this language that is very mysterious and
Mhm.
enigmatic, but once it's deciphered,
Mhm.
it's human, and
Yeah.
it's lacking, and
Yeah.
it's, you know, it points towards an acceptance of life as it is.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting you bring in Christianity, the idea that, you know, God came down to earth as a carpenter.
Yeah.
You know, nothing changed really.
The ultimate proletariat.
Yeah, exactly. Well, he has a job. So
yeah, that's good.
I mean, is it the army of the unemployed, Marxist terms? But anyway, you know, he is an artisan, so it's not necessarily. I don't know. It depends.
That's funny.
Yeah. Anyway, so shall we leave it there?
Yeah, I think so.
I don't know if there's anything else that we could talk. I mean, there's certain things that I really want to get into in terms of. It's potentially a Freudian emergent of my unconscious desires to have children, but children is is a really interesting topic, and children in our world, and millennials in relationship to children, how millennials were brought up, how that has affected us as a generation, how we listen to children now, and certain things I think you can probably hear that I'm talking about, but maybe I don't want to talk about too explicitly.
Yeah.
In terms of listening to children and children being all-knowing.
Yeah. Children are treated as sort of alien. But I think that, you know, at the moment that... Sorry?
So maybe they are kind of aliens.
No, just like the moment that they have a sense of self, they're already just like us.
Yeah. Yeah, they are alienated, just like all of us.
Estranged. All right.
Right. We are going to go to the opening of an envelope. No, we are going to the. You know what? This is a joke a personal joke between me and my friend Peter, but we are going to go to an art exhibition because why not?
Oh yeah.
See some friends. Are we going to go to the most negative comedian of all time tonight?
Oh yeah. We're going to see Anthony Jeselnik tonight,
yeah.
And hopefully that'll be good.
Be good.
All right. So
awesome.
next time.
Until next time.
Right.
Bye.
Bye.